He told her she was invisible, not with silence, with words, carefully chosen, delivered the way you'd correct someone who'd made the same mistake too many times. You're not the kind of woman people notice, Adeline. That's just the truth. She had believed him. For 4 years, she had believed him. Adeline Marsh had met Conrad Hale at a gallery opening in Chicago on a Thursday night in October, when the city smelled like rain and roasted chestnuts, and the kind of possibility that only comes before you know better. She was 31. She had just been named deputy director of the Whitmore Arts Foundation, a position she'd worked toward for 6 years, quietly, methodically, the way she did most things. Conrad was 42, handsome in the architectural way that photographs well, strong jaw, good posture, the kind of man who walked into a room and recalibrated it. He had laughed at something she said about a painting, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and she had thought, this one is different. She should have paid more attention to what he was laughing at. The painting was a woman standing alone in a crowd, her back to the viewer, her dress brilliant red against a sea of gray. Conrad had found it funny. Adeline had found it devastating. She should have noticed they were looking at the same image and seeing entirely different things. They married 18 months later. Her mother flew in from Portland. Her best friend Claudine cried during the vows. It was a Saturday in June, and the light was extraordinary, and Adeline had stood at the altar thinking she had finally arrived somewhere worth being. The unraveling was slow. It always is. It started with small corrections. The way she laughed. Too loud, he said, not here. The dress she chose for his firm's holiday party. Pretty, he said, but not quite right for the room. The opinions she offered at dinner with his colleagues. Interesting, he said afterward in the car, driving home with one hand on the wheel and his eyes on the road. But you don't need to talk so much, Adeline. Let them come to you. She started coming to fewer dinners. She had kept the Whitmore Foundation work, going through all of it. The funding campaigns, the artist residency programs, the scholarship fund she'd built from a $40,000 seed grant into something that now moved nearly $2 million a year through the hands of working artists who had no other door to knock on. She did it quietly from her home office because Conrad found the subject tedious and the hours inconvenient. She stopped mentioning it at his events. She stopped mentioning it at all. 2 years in, she realized she had shrunk herself to fit inside the shape of what he needed her to be. And the shape was very small. The night everything ended began the way bad nights often do, with a kindness she hadn't expected. It was the week before the Hartwell Gala, the annual benefit for the Chicago Children's Arts Initiative, which was one of the Whitmore Foundation's partner organizations. Conrad's firm was sponsoring a table. He had told her about it in passing, back in January, the way you mention things you've already decided. We're attending the Hartwell in March. I'll need you to be presentable. She had set the date in her calendar and said nothing. On a Tuesday night, 8 days before the gala, she came downstairs to find Conrad in the kitchen, already in his coat. It was 7:14 p.m. I'm going out, he said, not looking up from his phone. Dinner? She asked. Don't wait up. She stood at the kitchen island for a moment after the door closed, her hands resting on the cool marble. The house was very quiet. It was always quiet now. They had been intimate 3 times in the past year, and each of those times had felt transactional in a way she hadn't known how to name. She had tried once to say something, to reach across the distance and ask him where they had gone, and he had looked at her with a kind of patient weariness that was somehow worse than anger. You're being emotional, Adeline. This is just what marriage looks like after the beginning. She had apologized. She was still ashamed of that. She poured herself a glass of water and went back upstairs. He came home at midnight. She was still awake, lying in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house settling. He moved through the bedroom without speaking, and she could smell it on him. Perfume, something expensive and floral, and she closed her eyes and lay perfectly still, and let the knowing arrive the way she had been not knowing it for months. In the morning, she asked him. He didn't deny it. That almost impressed her. Her name is Vivian Alcott, he said. He was at the mirror, adjusting his tie, watching his own reflection with that familiar composure. She's been a colleague of mine for about 8 months. I didn't plan it, and the gala, Adeline said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He turned then. looked at her. And there it was, the thing she'd been seeing in pieces for years, finally assembled into something she could name. Pity. He felt sorry for her. "I was going to bring her," he said. "I think it's better if you don't come. It would be uncomfortable for everyone." Uncomfortable for everyone, as though she were a scheduling conflict. "I've already bought a dress," she said. He almost smiled. "Adeline," he said her name the way you say bless your heart. "You're not the kind of woman people notice at these things. You never have been. Vivian understands that world. She fits there. You'd just be standing at the edge of things the way you always do." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her, some last thin wire of hope she hadn't even known she was still holding, finally went quiet. "Okay," she said. He seemed surprised she'd agreed so easily. He left 10 minutes later. Adeline sat on the edge of the bed. The room held the residue of everything. 4 years of accommodating, adjusting, making herself smaller in rooms where she should have taken up space. The morning light came through the curtains and fell across the floor in long, pale rectangles, and she sat in the middle of all of it, absolutely still, and she let herself feel it, the humiliation, the grief, the bone-deep exhaustion of having loved someone who was always, at his core, disappointed in her. She felt it arrive, and she felt it move through her, and she did not break. She stood up, walked to the bathroom, looked at her face in the mirror for a long time, 35 years of a face she had been ignoring, and she said very quietly, like testing a frequency, "You are not invisible. You have never been invisible. You made yourself small for a man who was not big enough to deserve you." She said it again. She went to her office and she called Claudine. "Tell me everything," Claudine said, before Adeline had finished the first sentence. Adeline told her, all of it, the perfume, the name, the gala. "You'd just be standing at the edge of things, the way you always do." Silence on the other end. And then, "Adeline, listen to me. You are going to that gala. He's bringing her. I know. You're still going." A pause. "Call Desmond." Desmond Okafor was the chair of the Chicago Children's Arts Initiative Board and one of the Whitmore Foundation's longest-standing partners. He was also, quietly, one of the most connected men in the Chicago philanthropic world. He had known Adeline for 4 years. He had watched her build the scholarship fund from nothing. He called her twice a year to ask her opinion on funding strategy, and he always listened to her answers. She had never once mentioned him to Conrad. She found his number, and she called it. He picked up on the second ring. "Adeline, I was just thinking about you. Are we going to see you at the Hartwell?" She exhaled. "I was hoping to come, actually. Would you mind if I arrived with you? There's been a change in my circumstances." "It's a long story. Don't explain a thing," Desmond said immediately. "I have a table for 8 and 4 empty seats. Come with me. I'll have my assistant send the details." A brief pause. "I'm glad you called. There are some people at this gala who have been wanting to meet you for a long time." "Me?" she said. "Adeline." His voice was warm and a little amused. "The Whitmore Scholarship Fund placed 42 working artists last year. Half the organizations at this gala have benefited from your work directly. Did you think that went unnoticed?" She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't," he said gently. "That's about to change." She hung up, sat with her hands in her lap. Then she stood, walked to her closet, and began to move through it slowly. She had bought the dress 8 months ago, during a rare afternoon, when something in her had risen briefly to the surface. Some remnant of the woman she used to be, the one with opinions and laughter and a way of filling space without apologizing for it. She had seen it in the window of a small boutique near her office, and she had gone in, half convinced she'd come back out empty-handed. And she had tried it on and stood in front of the fitting room mirror and thought, for the first time in years, there she is. She had bought it without telling Conrad. She had hung it in the back of her closet beneath a dry cleaning bag and thought, someday was tonight. The dress was the color of deep amber, not gold, not orange, but the precise warm brown of late afternoon light hitting old whiskey in a glass. It was strapless, structured, fitted through the waist, and then falling in clean lines to the floor. It was not a loud dress. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of dress that did its work by making whoever was inside it look like they had somewhere important to be and always had. She put it on. She did her makeup slowly, with the attention she hadn't given herself in years. Foundation, the careful architecture of shadow and light at her cheekbones, a shade of lipstick, deep plum, borderline audacious, that she'd bought and never worn. She dried her hair and pinned it loosely at the back of her neck, the way she used to wear it before Conrad mentioned, once, that he preferred it down, and she had started wearing it down to please him, and eventually stopped making any choice about it at all. She added the earrings her grandmother had left her, small clusters of garnet surrounded by tiny diamonds, antique, the kind of jewelry that looked like it had a history because it did. She had never once worn them to a Conrad event. She didn't know why, exactly. She thought maybe she'd been protecting them from something. She stood back and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the woman Conrad had left in this room that morning. That woman had been apologizing for existing. This one was not apologizing for anything. She texted her driver, "Ready in 10 minutes. She picked up her clutch and walked out. The Hartwell Gala was held at the Meridian Club, which occupied the top 3 floors of a Beaux-Arts building on Michigan Avenue and had a ballroom that had hosted more than a century's worth of Chicago's most significant evenings. The ceilings were 30 feet high. The chandeliers were original. The windows overlooked the lake, and on clear nights the water and the sky became a single piece of dark silk punctuated with light. Desmond was waiting at the entrance, exactly as he said he would be. He was 61, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and he had the bearing of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone decades ago. When he saw Adeline, he went completely still. "Good Lord," he said quietly. And then, after a beat, "I should have insisted you come to these things years ago." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and he offered her his arm, and they walked in together. What happened next she would describe, later, to Claudine, as the room noticing, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the way heat works. It starts somewhere and radiates outward, and eventually you feel it everywhere. Conversations tilted, gazes moved. She heard someone say, "Who is that?" And it took her a moment to understand they meant her. She had been at dozens of events in this world. She had stood at the edges the way Conrad said she always did, and let the room happen around her. But this time Desmond walked her directly into the center of it, toward a cluster of foundation directors and board chairs who turned at their approach, and whose faces, when introduced to Adeline Marsh of the Whitmore Foundation, shifted into something she recognized as genuine interest. "The Whitmore Scholarship Fund," said a woman named Gloria Trent, who ran the Lakeview Arts Endowment, and had the sharp, appraising eyes of someone who had seen a great many grant applications and remembered the good ones. "You've placed 42 artists in the last year alone. I've been hoping to meet you. How did you build the corporate giving component? That's where most foundations fall apart." Adeline blinked. Then she answered. And she kept answering, because Gloria kept asking, and then 2 other people joined the conversation, and then 3 more, and somewhere in the middle of explaining how she had restructured the foundation's matching program to appeal to mid-sized firms that had arts mandates, but no mechanism to fulfill them. Adeline realized her voice was fully open, not measuring itself, just speaking the way she used to. It felt extraordinary. It felt like oxygen. She was mid-sentence when she felt it. The shift in the room, subtle but distinct, like a change in atmospheric pressure. She didn't stop speaking. She finished her thought, answered Gloria's follow-up question, and only then let her eyes move, just briefly, to the far side of the ballroom. Conrad was there. He was with Vivian Alcott, who was. Adeline processed this with clinical detachment. Strikingly beautiful. Tall, blonde, a red dress that made a statement and kept making it. She held her champagne glass like a woman who had been holding champagne glasses in rooms like this her whole life. Conrad's hand was at the small of her back. He hadn't seen Adeline yet. She turned back to Gloria and kept talking. It was another 20 minutes before their paths crossed, or, more accurately, before Conrad crossed hers, which is a different thing entirely. Adeline was moving through the room with Desmond toward the dinner tables when she heard Conrad's voice behind her, and she felt, briefly, the old reflex, the one that made her shrink, adjust, become apologetic, and she let it arrive and she let it pass. She turned. He was standing close, Vivian just beside him, and his face was doing something she had never seen it do before. It was recalibrating, the way a man's face recalibrates when reality declines to cooperate with his assumptions. "Adeline," he said. "Conrad." Her voice was even, unhurried. "This is Desmond Okafor. He chairs the Children's Arts Initiative. And this is Gloria Trent from the Lakeview Endowment. You know the Whitmore Scholarship Fund she's been asking me about? 42 artists placed last year." She watched him take it in, the warm cluster of significant people around her, Desmond's easy proprietary manner, the way he stood beside her like someone who had long ago claimed her as a trusted colleague. Gloria's expression, which was the expression of someone talking to a person of consequence. He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. "We should catch up with the table," Adeline said pleasantly. "Enjoy your evening." She turned and walked away, and she did not look back, and she did not feel the need to. Later, she didn't plan it, it simply happened. She was standing near the edge of the ballroom windows, looking out at the lake when Desmond came to stand beside her. "You all am," she said, and she meant it, and that surprised her. He was quiet for a moment. "Then I owe you an apology. We should have been amplifying your work for years. The way you've operated. Behind the scenes, giving credit everywhere, never asking for any. That's admirable, but it's also how good people get overlooked." She nodded slowly. "I didn't only do it for the foundation," she admitted. "I did it because it was easier. Because the person I was married to found it more comfortable when I didn't take up too much space." Desmond looked at her steadily. "That's over now, I gather." "Yes," she said. "That's over now." He nodded. "Good," a pause. "I meant what I said on the phone. There are people here tonight who want to work with you. Seriously, formally, with funding and a seat at the table. I'd like to help make that happen if you're willing." She looked out at the lake. The city lights lay across the water in long broken reflections, and somewhere down there, the world was continuing to be ordinary and complicated and full of people making decisions they would have to live with. She thought about the dress in the back of her closet. She thought about someday. "I'm willing," she said. Across the room, she knew without looking, Conrad was watching her. She could feel it in the way the room felt different on that side. She did not turn toward it. She had nothing left to give that direction. What she didn't know yet. What she would learn from Claudine, who heard it from a mutual friend 3 days later, was what had happened after Adeline walked away. Vivian had watched the entire exchange. She was not a stupid woman. She had watched Conrad's face during those few minutes, had tracked what it did when it saw Adeline surrounded by the kind of people whose opinions built or ended careers in this city. She had watched him go quiet and stay quiet, and she had done the calculation that intelligent women do quickly and efficiently, and she had not liked the answer. She found Conrad at the bar around 9 o'clock, and she handed him an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Claudine's source hadn't seen the original, but the version Adeline eventually heard was this: "I don't know your wife well, but I know what it looks like when a man has no idea what he had. I'm not interested in being the reason you didn't figure that out sooner. Take care of yourself, Conrad." He was alone for the rest of the evening. The divorce was filed the following week. It was not dramatic. There were lawyers, paperwork, the careful division of a life into 2 columns, and Adeline moved through all of it with a clarity she hadn't expected. She took the apartment in Wicker Park she'd always loved and never said so. She called her mother and told her everything, and her mother, who had been waiting 4 years to say "I never trusted him," was gracious enough to only say it once. The Whitmore Foundation moved into a new phase. Adeline accepted a seat on the Children's Arts Initiative's advisory board. She began speaking at conferences, not because anyone told her to, but because Desmond asked her to give a 10-minute talk at a funding summit in April. And she said yes, and the 10 minutes became 30, and afterward 3 different foundation directors asked for her card. She started taking up space. It turned out the space had always been there, waiting. 6 months later, at a small dinner hosted by the Lakeview Endowment, she sat next to a man named Arthur Bellamy, a structural engineer by training who had spent the last decade building affordable arts facilities in underserved communities across the Midwest. He was quiet in the way that confident people are quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they were genuinely listening. He asked her about the Whitmore Scholarship Fund's long-term residency component, and listened to her answer with the full weight of his attention, and when she finished, he said, "That's the piece everyone gets wrong. You got it right. How?" He asked another question. She answered that one too. By the end of dinner, she had laughed more than she had in years, and the laughing hadn't needed to be measured or apologized for. And she walked home through the lit streets of the city, thinking about nothing in particular except the pleasant, unfamiliar sensation of having been entirely, simply, herself. They began as colleagues, then as friends, and the friendship deepened with the patience of people who had both learned the cost of moving too quickly towards something that felt good before they'd looked at it clearly. Arthur had been married once, briefly, in his late 20s. We wanted different things, and we were honest about it eventually, just not soon enough. And he spoke of it without bitterness, which she took as a sign of a person who had done the work of understanding themselves. He never asked her to be quieter. He never implied she was taking up too much space. When she was passionate about something, he leaned forward. When she was uncertain about something, he asked questions rather than offering corrections. On a Saturday in November, they were walking along the lakefront, and she was mid-sentence about the Foundation's next capital campaign, and she stopped suddenly, self-conscious, the old ghost of Conrad's voice, and said, "Sorry, I'm going on about this." Arthur looked at her. "I asked you about it," he said simply. "I want to know." She looked at him for a moment, and something in her chest, some last knot of old grief, loosened. "Okay," she said, and kept going. He proposed on a quiet Wednesday evening in her Wicker Park apartment, with the city going about its business 12 stories below and no audience at all. He had cooked dinner, badly, enthusiastically, with a smoke alarm incident involving garlic bread that they would retell for years, and afterward they were sitting on the floor of her living room with wine glasses and the remnants of dessert, and he said, "I want to keep doing this, all of this, permanently, if you're willing." She knew what he was asking. She looked at him, this quiet, certain man who had never once needed her to be smaller, and she said yes, and the word came out with no hesitation at all, which told her everything she needed to know. They married the following spring, in a ceremony that was small enough to feel like a dinner party, and large enough to hold everyone who mattered. Claudine cried again. She cried at every Adeline-related milestone and made no apologies for it. Desmond gave a toast that made the whole room laugh and then go quiet for a moment, the way a good toast does. Adeline's mother danced. Adeline stood in the middle of all of it in a dress that was, again, the color of warm amber light, and she looked at Arthur across the room, and he looked back. And it was the simplest, most settled thing she had ever felt. A year and a half after that, their daughter was born, small and insistent and furiously herself from the very first hour. They named her Iris June. She had Arthur's eyes and Adeline's way of looking at a room, like she was already deciding what she thought of it. Conrad heard about it somewhere along the way people hear about the lives of those they failed to value. Secondhand, late, with nothing useful left to say. Whether it moved him, Adeline never knew, and eventually stopped wondering about. She was busy. She had a foundation to run, a daughter who had recently discovered that the word no was available to her and was using it frequently, and a husband who came home in the evenings and asked about her day and actually waited for the answer. She had stopped making herself invisible. It turned out she never needed to be visible to anyone else first. She just needed to stop agreeing with the person who had told her she wasn't worth seeing. That, in the end, was the whole of it. Not a dramatic revelation. Not a single moment of transformation. Just a woman who remembered on a night she hadn't planned to matter, that she had always been exactly enough, and decided, quietly and completely, never to forget it again.